Hey, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the MNC Move the Stairs Friday conversation. This is where we share brand protection PR strategies for your CBD businesses to tackle some of your biggest public relations challenges. And today, once again, we're excited to chat with you again. We are wrapping up our February theme of relationships. I can't believe we're already at the end of the month, Diane.
No, I can't believe it either. It has been
And we're
absolutely.
live.
And we're
Yes.
live. Exactly. We made it. We are alive. That's the best part. Okay.
There we go.
So today we're talking to CBD business owners about which data points they should focus on for their brand protection PR. And by the end of this episode, you're going to learn how specific metrics can be used to help you refocus your public relations strategies as you continue to build relationships with your consumers.
And as usual, we break this down into mini conversations. First, we're going to show you about basic media monitoring and why it's important to building your brand. Then we're going to give you a real life example of why working with traditional media to tell your story is so important. And we've got some good examples there. And then we're going to do a deep dive into the specific metrics that you should be measuring against for your brand protection PR goals. So this all sounds very kind of wonky and high level, but Jordan and I happen to love measurement and data and analytics and all that. So we're going to have fun.
Yeah, we're going to do our best to explain it and try to explain it in a way that our brain processes it so that everyone tuning in, either in the podcast or live, everyone's going to be on the same page. And speaking of which, if you are joining us live this afternoon, we want to know, how deep do you dig into data when you're shaping your public relations campaign? So feel free to drop us a comment. I just added that to the live stream. We'd love to hear from you as always. And if you're listening to us on the podcast or on replay, feel free to comment anyway. We frequently check into our social media and we'd be happy to get back to you.
The other thing is we have a free downloadable one sheet with every episode. So make sure you grab that on our website at Move the Stairs, at the Move the Stairs blog at movethestairs.com and get the sheet for this episode, which is our 10 steps approach to building relationships with the media. It's a great primer for you. So let's get started on all this.
Okay, so let's jump right in. These are terms that you have probably heard before: reach versus impressions. It's a mouthful. And this is something that we talk about when it comes to media monitoring. And this is a pain point for almost everyone. And understanding who is talking about your brand is really, really important for a number of reasons. And for instance, you can get ahead of a potential issue before it becomes a much larger problem. So this is where you've heard us talk about before, grab it while it's a headache, not a heart attack. That's where you can do that with media monitoring. And you can, if something is going to turn into a larger issue, at least if you are monitoring the media where your brand is being talked about, or where your industry is being talked about, you can get prepared and not be blindsided by something, because that it isn't maybe the most damaging place where a brand can get sideways, but it certainly is up there in the top 5 of just getting caught flat-footed and saying something because you hadn't gotten prepared for it. And it's not just traditional media that we're talking about either. Obviously, the biggest number of eyeballs right now is in social media, or what we call the digital landscape. So this is a number that Jordan and I, over time in working with Meltwater, we learned that you get about 10 times as many impressions on digital media. So a story that's been published online and then shared on social media, as you do eyeballs on the original story itself. So this is something that we're going to go through today. But if you are looking at reach versus impressions and you're monitoring the media and how your brand is being perceived, you can get a lot of information about how to protect your brand if you're keeping an eye both on traditional and on social media.
Absolutely. And you hear, Sarah tossing around these terms, reach, impressions, is a little bit of inside baseball. And that's okay. We're here to help you with that. Impressions is defined as the number of times your content appears on a screen. So when you hear somebody say, oh, we have 10,000 impressions, anytime we publish an article, whether that data is being sourced from circulation, subscriptions, what have you, it means that whatever content you're putting out there is going to get seen 10,000 times. Reach is actually a little more dialed in. It's going to be the number of people who've actually seen your content. So you're going to find a lot of that kind of in that metric used in paid social media content or paid digital media content as well as you're working to promote your brand. But I think it's important to know the difference between the two as you're working on those public relations outreach campaigns.
Yeah, it's great. Impressions, may not lead directly to sales. However, if you're looking to cast a wide net with your brand's PR outreach, it's important to know roughly how many impressions your target publication or influencers have so that you can better allocate your time and resources, which is really important. And we know those are two of the most important things to every business owner, and especially to CBD business owners.
Right. So think of impressions as the metric that you use on the top of that sales funnel. So right at the very top. You can't really determine exactly who saw your ad, but by targeting specific influencers or media outlets, you can research or you can make an educated guess about your future consumers in that audience. And this is right at the top of that sales funnel. We call that leading edge awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Are people aware of your company, aware of your products? Have they heard of you? Are they familiar with what your company offers? And so it's just that top level of, oh yeah, so-and-so, I've heard about them. And so the more, oh, sorry, Jordan, go ahead, man.
No, I was going to say, I totally agree with that, Sarah. And, the more impressions you get, especially with a particular outlet or publication, it can be great if you think your target audience lives within their audience, right? So if you could have, you could be talking to 1 million people, but if it's not your consumers, then kind of wasting your time. So it's important for you to do a little bit of research ahead of time so you know who their audience is. And you figure out, all right, does my audience spend my time watching this particular TV station or reading the local newspaper? Because as Diane pointed out earlier, time is money. And if you are investing your time in audiences that aren't going to see your product, you are basically spending your money for nothing, right? So it's really important. We have a client who is in the hospitality industry. They recently opened a brand new expansion to their property. And in an effort to highlight some of those amenities, we've used our media monitoring software, that's Meltwater, to identify influencers, publications, some particular reporters who would reach audiences that would benefit our client, so that any time that we put out a message for that client, we know that it's going to reach the ears of the people who they want to come up and visit, or they want to come up and write about the amenities that they have at their property. It's really important to nail that down and really dial it in so that your message is being heard by the right people.
Absolutely. Okay, so it's your turn in the comments section. So tell us, have you identified any local or national publications or influencers you think could help a target audience find your business and buy from you? There's, it's really important. The other thing that I always think about is, if it's investors or if it's leadership, where do they get their information? Because if they can see something about your company, places that they go as well, that also bolsters the whole idea of why PR is so important.
And don't forget, we have that free downloadable one sheet. Diane, I think this is one of my favorites. I know it's a recent addition to our collection, but it's the 10 steps you can use to get to know reporters on Twitter and really build those relationships. And, kind of segues us into the next segment. Before we get there, can you tell us more about Move the Stairs? What is Moving the Stairs?
Absolutely. Move the stairs means you take what life gives you and you make the most of it. So you don't whine, you don't say if only. It comes from a time when I was a producer and was at an election night, and getting the candidate first is the most important thing. But when I went in early to the ballroom where he was going to give his acceptance speech, I realized that the stairs from the podium led to my competition. So I went up and I looked at those stairs and I realized I could unhook them and move them to the other side of the podium. And that's exactly what we did. And we won the night. And the fact is that we try to move the stairs in everything that we do at M&C Communications, as well as in our own lives. And it's a great philosophy to live by.
And by the way, I just want to say happy 11th anniversary. M&C Communications is 11 years old this week. Last year, this week, we were in California producing a training workshop, a patient advocate training workshop. And that was the last time that we all three got to travel together. But that was the 10th anniversary. So I'm glad that at least for the 10th anniversary, we all got to be together and enjoy that. But it's M&C's 11th anniversary this week.
It is. And we're so pleased. You know, we started in the depths of the Great Recession, and now we have conquered COVID. So we're strong and moving the stairs every day to keep things going. So let's talk about why traditional media matters. So if you're looking for a crash course into insider media relations, be sure to check out this week's blog or podcast, because both are available online right now. And for the purposes of today's conversation, we want to highlight an example showcasing why your story is absolutely worth its weight in gold if you can find a newsworthy element. And that's so important. And that is, why should the average person care? That's what you have to think. And why should the reporter care is also really important.
Well, we've got a really great example this week. A lot of people, I'm sure, probably have read this article by the editor of Hemp Industry Daily. Kristen Nichols wrote and published an editorial titled "Make the Press Your Secret Branding Weapon." And, you know, as we read that article, we were like, oh man, she gets it, absolutely gets it. And she explained the story of Charlotte's Web and their rise to, again, that awareness, because I think we've all heard Charlotte's Web. And I think a lot of people outside of the CBD industry have heard about Charlotte's Web because of, a local journalist article about how they were, how one of their products worked. So Jordan, explain that.
Yeah, so for those who aren't familiar with Charlotte's Web, Charlotte was a little girl, and she was born with a rare disorder, a rare syndrome. And that syndrome causes seizures, uncontrollable seizures. And unfortunately, this disorder is resistant to anticonvulsant drugs. So when she was 6 years old, her parents and caregivers began treating her seizures with CBD. Now, they lived in Colorado, so it was legal here. Many other states at the time, it still was not legal. So that was a little controversial, but they were very open about that. And when they started to give CBD to Charlotte, they saw an almost immediate transformation with her seizures, reducing from hundreds that she would have in a week to only a handful over the period of a few months. So a local reporter caught wind of this non-traditional treatment and wrote an article, and then it went viral. So the company ended up rebranding to Charlotte's Web in honor of that little girl, and is amongst, some of the leaders in CBD worldwide. And as Sarah pointed out, even people who don't use CBD are aware of who they are and what products they manufacture.
Yeah, and it's sad. Charlotte just passed away very recently, and there was tremendous media coverage on that as well.
Right.
When Charlotte's Web came into being, there were obviously so many things that went right for them in this story, and including things they did with their significant ascent. But the bottom line is, as Kristen puts it in her article, when you have a patient or a client finding amazing results from your products, get those folks in touch with a local reporter. You can't make the medical claims, but reporters can share the story of your experience and your client's experience with no chance of government sanction. Sometimes these local newspaper stories turn into priceless global media exposure. Just ask the Charlotte Web's pioneers. And that's the end of her quote. And I think that is exactly right on. I mean, if a reporter is doing a story, you are not making claims because the reporter is actually reporting on it. So you want to make sure that you take advantage of that. So the reporter wasn't trying to sell anything to their audience. However, the human interest portion of the story, and that you're always looking for not only the factual part, but the human interest part, was something that to many was just irresistible. So we don't expect our clients to have viral stories like this on a regular basis, but we do constantly try to evaluate what stories we can tell by searching for a newsworthy angle and then the human interest portion. And when you put those two together, the intersection gives you just about a perfect story to pitch.
Right. So tell us what you think. Tell us about a time that your CBD business made the news. And more than that, if you have been in the news, what did you do with that coverage? That's really the key. Do you just leave it in the news? Do you, I don't know, share it on your social? I mean, how many times do you take that coverage and what do you do with it? I see Jordan grinning because of course that's where we're headed in this discussion.
Absolutely. And, to keep people tuned into next week too. Wow, we're starting the first week of March. And with that, if you're new to our podcast, we do a monthly theme. So next month's theme, we're going to help you put some spring into your PR plan steps. So if you have questions, have a particular angle that you'd like us to focus on as we're getting ready for next week, feel free to shoot us an email, leave us a comment here in the video, and we'll be happy to address that for you. But boy, on to metrics. And we left a little bit of extra time for this one because it's a little beefier. And I think this is where people can get confused because there is so much data available out there. It's really important that you hone in on specific metrics so that you don't get lost in the data. So we use data-driven analytics from Meltwater. Sarah mentioned that earlier in the conversation to advise our clients on their current and future public relations goals that we work with them on. But the problem is, again, there's just so many metrics. How do you choose, right? How do you hone in on the most important ones? And from a PR standpoint, we're always going to modify what's best for our clients when we're looking at metrics. But I think when we were putting this together, Sarah, there were three that stood out to me that we use almost for every single client as we're working on reports to really highlight what it is that our work is doing and their work is doing and our work together is doing to make sure that their public relations outreach is reaching the people that it should be, right?
Right. So the first, because you're absolutely right. I mean, the first thing that we show in our reports to clients all the time is media exposure. And this takes us right back to the top of that funnel, awareness. Are people aware of your company and what products it offers? And then that helps us start to hone in a little bit. Who is talking about your brand? How often? How many eyeballs are in that audience? Is that audience your people? Are those your customers? And the importance, this is what's important here, is that when you're trying to measure the success of a specific event, or when you're tracking a campaign. So first of all, you need to benchmark whether or not you're getting the exposure that you're looking for, and then aim to correlate your exposure to your end goals. Now that's a lot of words. But really what we're talking about is media coverage your end goal, or is it an intermediary step? And this is, I think, what differentiates a strategic approach to brand protection PR from a just kind of, if I get a bunch of coverage in the media, then automatically I'm going to get a bunch of sales. Like those two don't necessarily correlate. So when your event or campaign was picked up by 2 local TV stations and the local newspaper, but it didn't move the needle on sales, there's a really good chance that your audience is not watching the local news or reading the local paper. However, if your goal is to establish a relationship with the media, and this is what we call thought leadership, and begin to fill the trust bucket so people have heard of you, they understand how you do business, they have heard about your products and that you're really transparent about your process and your products, you start to fill what we call the trust bottle. So, the amount of media exposure that your brand gets from that coverage matters, even if your sales don't see an immediate boost. But what I will say is, the way we practice brand protection PR is that media coverage is not an end goal, it's an intermediary goal. That's the first step toward building brand protection PR and taking that coverage and then doing more with it.
I think that's such an important point too, because a lot of times you do get that thought of, well, if the story gets picked up, we'll have a line out the door. Our inventory is going to be completely sold out. And it doesn't always work that way, and that's okay. If that happens, that's wonderful. But there's so much more to be gained sometimes when you mentioned in the media and they're coming to you for your opinion on what is happening in the world of CBD. Now, when they do come to you, and you are published and your CBD brand is mentioned, another thing we follow is what's called trending themes. So this little metric lets us, it basically gobbles up all the stories that mention your brand, and we can set a date and time range for that. So if we were looking at a particular event or campaign, we can make sure that what's being published out there in the digital landscape or what's being mentioned over the air, whether it's radio or TV, is on point to what our client's messaging is for whatever that goal or campaign is or that event is. So whether it's on social media, whether it's traditional media, digital media, this little metric helps us make sure that the keywords returning are what we want to be seeing. So I think a really good example of this one here is when we followed our client, again, in the hospitality industry that we were talking about earlier in the podcast. They were forced to close due to COVID, and then were allowed to reopen. And when they reopened, there was a very large amount of media coverage. We'll just put it that way. And what was fantastic to see about that media coverage and looking at the trending themes topic was that all of the messaging that was being explained to the public was on point for what we wanted to make sure was conveyed by our client to the public. There was messaging on safety. There was messaging on sanitation. There was messaging on masks so that everyone was on the same page and no one was getting lost. And I think that's just so important too, especially now that we're in the COVID-19 era. We're in the era of rapid cultural change. It's really important to make sure that what your client is trying to get out there to the public isn't going to be misinterpreted, which could then potentially lead to an issue or a headache in this case.
Well, and I was thinking about another way that we use trending themes, and another client of ours is in the agriculture industry, and they were not involved. Nobody anywhere in this in the vicinity was involved in a listeria event 11, 12 years ago. But by keeping an eye on trending themes around the product that they grow, we can give them a heads up. Hey, there's an issue in Australia, or there's an issue on the East Coast, or there's a recall going on something. And we can give them a heads up and just say, are you comfortable with the safety messaging? Don't be blindsided if you get a question like this. And that's another way that those trending themes can really help us get ahead of an issue for a client, where it's not a specific brand or a specific company being involved in something, but an issue somewhere in the industry. And that's, kind of like I said up top, that's where companies can get kind of sideways, and it doesn't have anything to do with you, but you got to be ready for those questions. And that's how trending themes can help you get ready for that.
Absolutely. They've been tremendously helpful for us. The other thing that we really look at is sentiment. Now, this metric can be pretty tricky on the surface. If you take it at face value, you have to trust that an algorithm is yielding accurate results. And it's difficult enough for humans to determine context behind articles at times. So without investigating further, you may have some false positives or negatives. So here's an example of how we've used sentiment in the past. When we launched a campaign for a nonprofit client, the Hope with Answers podcast, we looked at sentiment to make sure that a positive message was emanating from our press release and associated media coverage. Generally speaking, you'll get a lot of neutral returns, but if your message is being interpreted correctly, you're going to get far more positive than negative responses. And that sentiment score is going to be really in your favor. And we achieved that in the case of the Hope with Answers podcast. But we check it every month. It's not just a one and done. You have to stay on top of it because so many things do change in our world so quickly right now that you never know where things are going to go. So it's not something that I did this project and I checked it and I'm done, or I have this client or I have this product that is out there and I want to know what people are saying about the product. Things change, as we know. Things go in and out of favor. This is a great way for you to know and have a heads up because you're hearing the chatter and measuring that on social media.
Right. So, let us know how you are going to use this brand protection strategy. Does this make sense? Do these terms that we're using, reach and impressions and trending themes and sentiment, right? I mean, we've just been inside baseball for 26 minutes at this point. Does that all make sense? And does it make sense how we are explaining how we use this at a deeper level than just, oh, look, we got some media coverage, or, oh gosh, we've got a positive or a negative sentiment, or, there's something showing up in trending themes. You can see how we take this information and really dig below the surface to find out what's going on here. How is this getting to our client goals? So let us know in the comments how you're going to use this strategy, and if you have any questions about it. So to just briefly recap today's Move the Stairs chat, we have talked about those keywords that are a little bit challenging: impressions versus reach and why they matter. We have given you a real life example of how traditional media and leveraging that traditional media coverage can help your brand. And definitely go back and check Hemp Industry Daily's article, Kristen Nichols' article from, I think it was earlier this week or late last
Monday,
week.
Yeah.
Yeah, Monday. Really fantastic article. And then we've also covered 3 of the specific metrics that we look at before advising our clients. And Jordan, I just very, very quickly, I would love to have you explain why we build a custom dashboard for each of our clients. I mean, what's the purpose of that? Like, why wouldn't we just have a set of metrics that we measure for every single client and then just repeat that dashboard over and over again in Meltwater?
Yeah, well, everybody's goals are different. So we have to adapt what we're doing for our clients to reflect what their ultimate end goals are. So whereas some dashboards may be focused on getting into a particular media outlet, others may be focused on social media. So it's important that we're looking at different ways to measure what we are doing for the client, so that they're kind of seeing the end goals that they want to see at the end of the day. And it's hard when you first fire up the software and you just get bombarded by all of these different metrics, and you're like, oh wow, this is really cool. But it's also important to take a step back and say, okay, how will this measurement help me? How will this measurement help our client in achieving their goals? And if you can figure that out, and I think the 3 broad ones that we gave as an example there it's just kind of the broad brush stroke, but you can get even more granular as you host events or as you start a campaign. If you have something that you're going to open or a new product you're going to launch for your CBD brand, you can really dig deep if you want to. But I do think it's important that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's great when you're measuring at 30,000 feet looking down, but as you're getting a little more specific, that's where you can actually get into some of the more hyper-specific metrics to make sure that you're successful in what you want to be doing with your PR outreach for a particular brand.
Yeah, so I think that's really important. Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you all for joining us for this week's Move the Stairs Friday chat. We are absolutely here to help you and help protect your CBD business with Brand Protection PR. If you like the podcast, please rate, subscribe to us, and leave us a review. We'd love to see that, and we'd love to help you. So if you'd like, send us an email, drop us a line, leave us a comment, and we'd be happy to get back to you. So be sure to join us next week for our new monthly theme of putting some spring into your step for your PR plan. And we'll see you right back here at the same time and same places next Friday. Have a great weekend, everybody.